Hi, everybody. This is another edition of the Indie Cafe 2. And today we have a very, I don't know how many words I could say, special guest, historic and legendary music photographer, author, folk musician, and founder of the Morrison Hotel Gallery. His name is the very famous Henry Diltz. But before we get in the interview, I want to make a note. Judith, my partner Judith and I are in a historic show in New York at the Lincoln Center NYPL Gallery. It's the Lou Reed NYPL exhibit, which is going on till March 4th, 2023. Our album covers are displayed on Lou and the Velvet Underground, and we hope you all can make it.
Spencer, it's the New York Public Library of Performing Arts at Lincoln Center,
Okay.
to be specific.
And Judith hit it right on the head. I love it. So now we're going to get into our special guest, and that is Henry Diltz. Hello, Henry. How are you?
Hi, good, Spencer. How are you?
Good. Okay, we'll start off with, I'll give you some words, and you'll just do expounding on those words. And I'm going to start off with first instrument you ever played.
The harmonica. Well, no, as a little boy, I took piano lessons, but I play by ear. And so, the teacher would play a little thing, the notes would be in front of me, but I just hear what she played and play it back. So I never learned to read the notes. And then in the Boy Scouts in high school, or elementary school, actually, I played the harmonica around the campfire, Red River Valley and stuff. And then I learned to play the clarinet one time. My dad was in the State Department, and I lived overseas. I was in Tokyo in elementary school when I was in the Boy Scouts playing the harmonica. Then I was in Bangkok, Thailand in high school, and I had a clarinet because a friend of mine played the clarinet, and I really liked the sound of it. And I bought a clarinet before we went to Thailand, and I didn't even meet any kids. I didn't go to school for a couple of months because we got summer. And I would sit in my room in the dark and play the blues in the low key on the clarinet. And then in college, I fell in love with the banjo, Pete Seeger and Peggy Seeger. Peggy Seeger played 5-string banjo, but kind of mountain modal, real kind of mournful chords and sounds, and it was hypnotic. Just that 5th string, that drone string, it's like bagpipes,
Wow.
Hitting that same 5th string all the time, and
yeah,
it was hypnotic to me. And so I bought a banjo, and I moved to Hawaii to go to the University of Hawaii and study psychology. But I ended up hanging out in the little coffee house down in Waikiki called the Green Sleeves Coffee House. And I was learning how to play the banjo from the Pete Seeger record, how to play the 5-string banjo. So that was my instrument then, the banjo, for years.
And how about the modern folk quartet?
Yeah, we were guys who hung out in that coffee shop. I mean, for a few years, you'd sit in the corner and either play and sing some old folk songs, or you'd, sing with somebody else or a couple other people. So we were constantly putting together groups of people. And I mean, at one point we were called the Rum Runners. And we played a little place in Waikiki. And then this Hawaiian guy, Stanley White, called me one day. He said, "Hey, man, pick up." He said, "I just got a job singing in Dolan's Steakhouse on Waikiki. You want to join me and sing harmony and play the banjo?" And he said, "We'll get that kid from Punahou High School to play the bass." And that was Chip Douglas.
Wow.
Got him to play the bass. And that was 3 of us. And we were called the Lexington 3. And we played there for about half a year. And then the coffee house owner, Cyrus Faryar, who has always been my kind of best friend in life, he'd gone to the mainland to sing in a group with Dave Guard. That group broke up, and he called me up one day while we were playing at Dolan Steakhouse every night. He said, "Hey, why don't you come to LA and we'll put a group together? And I said, Cyrus, come back to Honolulu. We got a group. And we became the Lexington Four. And so now, and Chip Douglas was a really good music arranger. He loved the Four Freshmen, kind of like Brian Wilson. So we were singing these old folk songs. You know, you don't write folk songs. They're old miners or cowboys or sailors, you know, mountain people. And you find these songs and give it your own, you know, impression, your own version. And so Chip would arrange them in 4-part harmony, which is really, it's a gorgeous sound. In folk music, you hear a lot of 3-part harmony. I mean, Peter, Paul, and Mary, the Kingston Trio, you know, Crosby, Stills, Nash.
Yeah.
But when you put that 4th part in there, you know, when it's 3 parts, someone sings a melody, somebody sings a third above, and someone sings a third below, and that's 3-part. When you got 4-part, you've got to put that 4th part in between those other parts. Then you have a very sophisticated chord. I call it a professional chord, like a jazz chord, you know.
Wow.
It's a 7th or a 9th or a flat 5 or something. So that's what we did, and we perfected that at this steakhouse for about a year. And then we somehow decided to go to LA to kind of seek our fortune. So we all came to LA, and the first time we played was a week after we got here. We played at the Troubadour Club at the Hoot Night, which is like open mic night, you know. And so we got up on stage and started into the song, The Ox Driver. And when we hit the chorus, it broke into this strident 4-part harmony. And we hit those chords, and the audience like stood up and started clapping, you know, and it was scary. What is going on? You know, we got at the beginning of the song. Well, you know, they'd never heard us. I mean, if we'd have grown up in LA, they would have heard us, you know, improving over the years. But we were already there. And so that night we got assigned to an agency, and we got with Warner Brothers Records, and we got a manager, and it all happened pretty quickly. And then we made a couple albums for Warner Brothers and toured the country for the next 4 or 5 years.
So we can find some of your records. It exists, the Modern Folk Quartet, on vinyl.
Yeah, you can Google it. Here's the thing, our discography. We made 2 Warner Brothers albums, and those are still available. Warner Brothers Records. The Modern Folk Quartet was one, and the other one was called Changes. We were going to do a 3rd album and call it Into a Frog.
Wow.
Wait
a minute. You were on some sort of psychedelics. No, I'll take that back.
Well, you know, here's what happened in the music business. We were touring around doing college concerts because folk music was the music of the land. And the Kingston Trio was like the Beatles to us. Very exciting. And colleges had lots of concerts, and there were folk clubs all over the country. And the thing that's different from today is back then in the 60s, when you played a folk club, you didn't play one night, you played 6 nights.
Wow.
We never played a club one night, which is what they always do now. It's always one night.
Right.
And then you'd play 6 nights, which is great because you'd get accustomed to the room, and people would come and see you. And by the weekend, they'd bring their friends, and it would be packed by the weekend. So in 64, we were up in New England going to another college. We stopped in a motel that night to see the Beatles play on Ed Sullivan because we'd heard about them. We knew they were a big deal, but we never seen them. We didn't much. It was early in their career. And so we saw them play on Ed Sullivan. And so we listened to them and said, wow, I mean, you know, she loved you. Yeah. What? And look, they have an electric bass. We had a stand-up bass. So by the next week, we had an electric bass. And guitars, you know. And pretty quickly, we were singing folk rock, is what they called it. And that's where you got the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield, because those were all folk. Stephen Stills, Neil Young, they were more or less folk musicians.
Loving Spoonful?
Yeah, the Lovin' Spoonful, right? They were all,
Right.
and that was the new music of the land, folk rock. You
Now,
know,
Henry, tell us about the Phil Spector story with the single.
yeah. Well, we were playing clubs in L.A. and once again all week, you know, playing a lot of clubs, and Phil Spector came in and saw us, and he wanted to experiment with a folk rock group. He didn't have anything like that, you know.
Yeah.
And so we talked to our manager, and we started going up to his house in the afternoons and sitting around and playing with him. He'd play his 12-string, and we'd play. We were jamming. We'd sing Rose. There is a rose in Spanish Harlem, and then at night he would come down to the club with his 12-string and stay up in front of us and sing Rose in Spanish Harlem, and we'd go we'd sing the background things, and eventually he found a song for us, a Harry Nilsson song. This Could Be the Night. And we recorded that with a wall of sound. And after we had it recorded and did the vocals, we were surprised to see our big major hero, Brian Wilson, come in. And we could see him through the window of the control room, sitting in there in his robe and slippers, listening to the song over and over. We didn't even go talk to him. We were kind of in awe, you know, but you know, he was a big fan of the Four Freshmen and 4-part harmony, and here we were singing 4-part harmony, and he loved Phil Spector. He idolized Phil Spector, so that's why he was listening to it. But for years after that, I'd see him around Hollywood, and he'd say, "Oh, you're the guy who sings This Could Be the Night." You know, that was friends, and then we kept waiting for Phil to put it out. We thought, okay, now we've made it. You know, now we're ready to go. Our fortunes are made. But he wouldn't release it. It didn't come out. We'd call our manager. You hear anything? No, Phil's in New York. They don't, you know, nobody knew. In the meantime, Cyrus Fariar from Hawaii said, I'm going to go back to the island. Call me if anything happens. Yeah, we did some touring and all, but then we kept waiting for that. And finally, a couple years later, it came out on an English album called Rare Masters.
Wow.
You know, from playing on that song, and I would play arpeggios on the banjo, like da 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 da, bluegrass. He loved that sound, and I played on a Tina Turner record. I played on a Ron record called Paradise. I played on the Righteous Brothers.
Great. Oh my God.
He loved that sound. It was, you know, buried in amongst the 8 guitars.
Yeah.
But there was kind of a rolling sound in there. So, you know, that was interesting. And I mean, that song Paradise by the Ronettes, which we loved, and we used to sing it on stage, that didn't come out either. That came out on the Rare Masters album a few years later. It was very picky, you know, and a little paranoid. I mean, he was a great guy to us. We had a great time hanging out at his house all afternoon playing music.
Right.
You know, we'd stand around the piano and he'd sit there and play a chord and say, you sing this, you sing this. And then we'd jam on our guitars. He'd play his 12-string. He was just kind of trying to, you know, I don't know, get us tighter, I guess.
Okay. But he did consider you guys to be you were on his Rare Masters record, so you were considered to be masters.
On that one song. And you know, when his box set came out years later, we're on Phil Spector box set. Wow. And the other thing that happened was Rodney Bingenheimer was a young guy here in town who had a radio show every night, and he used our song as his theme song. This could be the night, you know.
Oh, that's great.
It was me
singing. Did you get paid for that? Did you get paid well for that?
No, I think the record company probably made a couple of pennies every time it played, but you know.
So let's start with your photography life. Okay, here's a good one. Buying a $20 camera.
Right. And it fits in with all of this because after we did that Phil Spector single, we did one more big tour for a couple of months back and forth across the country. And so one morning when we were leaving some university in Michigan, we were in a Clark Cortez motorhome, That's what we were traveling in. And we were leaving town, and someone looked out the window and said, "Hey, look, a secondhand store." I went, "Oh," we pulled in because we always love to see a secondhand store.
We all do.
Stuff you didn't need. And as we walked in the door, my pal Cyrus was in front of me, and right inside the door was a table with these little used cameras. And as we walked in, he just reached down. He said, "Oh, a camera. I need one of those." And he picked it up, and I was behind him. I said, "Yeah, why not? Me too." And I grabbed one. Never thinking about having a camera, I just kind of copied him. I thought, well, there's a good start. I'll buy one of those too. They were $20. And then we got back in the motorhome, and Cyrus said, "Pull into the next drugstore and I'll buy film for everybody." 3 of us bought cameras. And I got the little yellow Kodak box. I put the cassette of film in there. I said, "Well, how do you set these numbers, Cyrus? Well, how do you set them?" He said, "Well, look on the box. Sunlight, 250 at 8. And I said, oh, okay. Oh, there's the 8. There's the 250. Now let's go out in the sunlight and take some pictures." So for 2 weeks we did that. We photographed each other, and we got by a junkyard or a field full of cows or whatever we saw on the road. We were all out there taking pictures of that and each other. And here's the thing that happened, though, that was surprising. I never thought about what the film would look like. I didn't even know what it was going to look like. I hadn't thought this out,
Yeah.
It's something we were doing. And so we got the film developed when we got back to LA, and I got my film back, and it was a bunch of little yellow boxes with slides in them, transparencies. I said, "Wow, yeah, they're little slides. Let's have a slideshow." I didn't know. I never thought about what they were going to look like, So we had a slideshow with all of our hippie friends. And when I saw the first slide of mine hit the wall in the dark,
wow,
glowing with color, 8 feet wide,
wow,
it blew my mind. I just thought,
wow,
this is like being there again. It's like, this is magic. This is amazing. I wasn't a kid that had slideshows of our summer vacations in my family, and and that very night up in Laurel Canyon, I said to myself, "Man, I'm going to take more of these so we can have more of these slideshows." It was a great get together, and I did. And I started photographing all my friends all week long, and those people were Stephen Stills and Mama Cass and Neil Young, people like that, David Crosby, musicians, because that's mostly who I knew. And I just always have my camera, and I just take pictures of whatever I saw, thinking that that'll be entertaining. And for the weekend, a dog or a fire hydrant or a sign or one of my friends eating lunch, whatever it was, I take a picture, show all of this stuff on the weekend. And then some of those people started using the pictures for publicity and then album covers.
Talking about album covers, the 11 Spoonful first album cover.
Yes. When I was in the folk group, one time we went on a 41-night bus concert tour. It was folk groups. There were 4 or 5 folk groups, and we did 41-nighters. And in one of the groups was called the Knoblich Upper 10,000, and a guy named Eric Jacobson was the banjo player in that group. So we got to be real good friends over that month and a half. And while I was picking up a camera and learning how to use it, he was in New York wanting to produce, and he was producing the people that would eventually be the 11 Spoonful. He started doing something with, I think, Mama Cass and John Sebastian, and they found Zal. And gradually they put this group together. So right at the beginning, before I'd really done much of anything, he called me. He said, "Hey, Henry, I hear you want to take photos. Why don't you come to New York for the summer? The boys need a lot of pictures because we just had a big hit with Do You Believe in Magic?" So I did. I flew to New York and spent 3 months on the road all summer, flying around the country, photographing them day and night and everything else that I saw. And it was kind of like, like when you not like an intern, but I forget what the word is, but when you work for a blacksmith and you help out and you become a blacksmith. I mean, it was a way of learning on the job.
Yeah.
I mean,
The word is apprentice.
Apprentice, that's it. Apprentice. And I was shooting them on stage, them, in the airplane or the limousine, the rent-a-car station wagon. And one thing very interesting I learned there, because I did the slideshow for my friends up in Laurel Canyon, if I took a lot of pictures, a series would develop. Like I'd take pictures of my friends reading. Cyrus was always reading. I had a bunch of pictures of him. Someone else reading. I get 300 people reading, and I show those 1, 2, 3. That's a reading series, right?
Yeah.
And then I got a sleeping series, people taking naps, and then an eating series.
Oh, wow.
So they say, oh, it's the eating series. Well, then when I got out into the world, like for instance, with the Loving Spoonful, every little town in the Midwest, we'd land at the little airport, little 2-engine plane. We'd get into the rented station wagon to drive to the motel or hotel. And on the way, I would look out the window. I'd say, wow, the fire hydrants are orange and green in this town. And each town had different colored fire hydrants. I found that very interesting. And as soon as we got to the motel, I would run out to the corner and take a portrait of that fire hydrant. So that summer, I had 100 fire hydrant pictures, and they were, you think of a fire hydrant as red. You seldom see a red one. In New York, they're black and silver. In LA, they're all bright yellow. In San Francisco, they're white with a beautiful light blue top on it. And I just found that, really interesting. And then I had the fire hydrant series. And then I had the t-shirt series and the tattoo series and the, so trucks, cars, and flowers, and babies, and animals. And I'm a Virgo. I kind of analyze, and I'm a list maker. And so I get kind of a Virgo thing to get these series,
Right.
Today I have, I don't know, at least 50 different series. When I go to another town or another country, I go crazy because they're all brand new things to fit in the series.
What's on the top of the list for today? Not today, meaning today, but for the time for now.
Well, I kept journals of everything I did, and I read back and I think, my God, I did so many things every day. Yeah. I'd shoot something at somebody, a recording session, and then something else later in the day. And that night I'd go to some club and shoot somebody. I was just shooting all the time. Well, I don't do that now. Partly COVID kind of slowed all that down. After 55 years, it was 1966 when I picked up that camera. And so now, years later, it becomes galleries, museums,
right?
Slideshows.
Yeah,
right.
I don't shoot 3 jobs a day anymore. I might, one job a month. I went to or one job a week. I went to Dublin a couple months ago with Garth Brooks and spent 10 days photographing him and his concert. Wow. I did photograph Neil Young the other day at a recording session for a few minutes. And so, it comes along. I don't really sort of do jobs anymore for magazines or things.
I want to ask you, Henry, about 2 album covers.
Yeah.
One, the story with each. One is the Morrison Hotel album cover. The second is the Crosby, Stills, and Nash album cover. The stories behind that.
2 of my sort of iconic granddaddy album covers. Yeah. Well, so there I was in the early 60s or the middle 60s photographing my friends. And one day in, I think, 68, I was in the park on a Sunday photographing all the hippies who were there for a love-in. We'd have a love-in. It just meant everyone would go to the park, bring your kids, bring your guitar, bring your dog, and everybody would just hang out all afternoon. We call that a love-in. Everybody would dress up colorfully. And I was there photographing everybody, which we did. And a guy walked up to me, a guy named Gary Burden. And he said, hey, you're a photographer. I need to do, Mama Cass wants me to do her album cover, her first solo album cover.
Wow.
You want to help me do that? I said, sure, I know Mama Cass. So that was the first album cover. Now, Gary was actually an architect and was remodeling part of Mama Cass's house on Laurel Canyon. And they got to be good buddies because he was there every day. And eventually she said, Gary, I'm doing my first solo album outside of the Mamas and Papas, and I'd like you to design the cover for me. And I tell this story a lot. He said, well, Cass, I'm not a graphic designer. I'm an architect. And she said, well, Gary, you make a blueprint, you make an album. So he said, okay, I'll give it a try. So we photographed Mama Cass, and that became the first album cover we did. So then, that was 68. We did a couple of things. And in 69, we were sort of getting known as a graphics team. And we were doing all the stuff for Elliot Roberts, Lookout Mountain Management. And he managed Neil Young and Joni Mitchell. And then David Geffen joined him. It was Geffen Roberts. And we were the in-house, photo and album cover production team. So I'll do the CSN first because that came first. Gary would call me up in Laurel Canyon. Every job started with a phone call up in Laurel Canyon,
Right.
He said, hey, tomorrow afternoon, we need to take some photos of CSN. Now, I knew these guys. I knew Steven in 63 in New York City. And I met Graham in the Hollies in 66 when I was photographing the 11 Spoonful. And David I met on the road in the middle 60s as well. So I knew these guys for a number of years. And, we all knew they were singing together and it really sounded good. And they had no photos whatsoever to even put in the Billboard, or Variety.
Right.
These guys are recording a new group. So they needed some kind of publicity photo. So we all got in Gary's old 50-something Ford station wagon. And we drove around West Hollywood and we got out here and there and took a few pictures here and there. And Graham had seen this old funky house with a couch in front of it. So we were driving up and down the blocks looking for this, and we found it right near Santa Monica Boulevard. There was the house with a couch. We just pulled up the car. I went click, click, click. Now, they were sitting on the couch, and I'm framing is my thing. I have a framing Jones, The reason I take so many pictures is every time I take a picture and frame it up just the way I like to see it, it's like endorphins or something, They're sitting on this rectangular couch, which frames perfectly, in my camera. So I'm up really close, just getting the couch, and the three guys looking at me. And then Gary says one of the two things he always said to me, back up. And the other thing he always would say to me was, just shoot everything that happens. Film's the cheapest part. Those were two axioms, of my photo career learning. And indeed, I always go close up. I start with a headshot like that. Really, it's interesting to see what's around, what the whole area looks like.
That's right.
It did teach me that. So I backed up across the street and got the whole house. Now, mind you, we were just shooting publicity pictures, but Gary had a thought in his mind, I guess. And then Gary had a rare gift of he could go through 500 photos and pick out the one that was the cover.
Great, yeah.
He had great graphic taste.
Right.
And they had a slideshow to look at these publicity pictures, and they said, wow, that would make a great album cover. However, in the couple of days it took to develop that film, we've changed our name now to Crosby, Stills, and Nash. We didn't know what order it would be, but just now we changed it to Crosby, Stills, Nash. And your picture is Nash. Stills. I remember the discussion. We said, well, we could turn it over, but then Steven would be playing left-handed.
Right.
Be confusing for years and all.
Right.
And I remember saying, well, hey, let's just go back, jump on the couch. What would it take? 5 minutes. Just sit up there in the right order and we'll take one roll of film and we'll have it. So we did that. We got in the car. We drove back where the house was, and the house wasn't there anymore.
Oh,
Like
gee.
2 days later, the house was knocked down by a bulldozer, and they made a
Oh my
parking lot.
God. Wow.
Right about the time Joni had that song out, "Pave Paradise," put up a parking lot. That was a good illustration of it. And then that was one other thing about that album. Gary, being an architect, architects like to use different kinds of tools, different kinds of materials.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it was wood or granite or plastic or whatever. And he made albums in his career with tin foil and different color, you know. For that album, for some reason, he told the printers, because he always oversaw everything, even the printing. He went down to the printing house and he told the printers, I want you to turn the paper over and print it on the uncoated side.
Oh, wow.
All covers were glossy,
Right,
shiny.
right.
He said, I want you to turn it over, print on the uncoated side. And they said, well, we can't do that. It's going to soak up the ink. And he said, I don't care. I want you to do that. It was beautiful. It came out and it had a
Gorgeous.
texture. It has a matte. The original ones have a matte feeling. They're not glossy. It's kind of organic, like wooden music, you know, like
yeah.
And it just fit. The whole package felt so good.
I always feel when I'm doing an album cover, Judith and I are doing a cover, to have that matte feel when the sound goes with it, you know, the sound of whoever's playing. Yeah. And that had that feel, you know, perfect for that, you know, that album cover.
That 12-inch square was such an art form. And of course, we've all heard, you know, many people have said, and we've all said ourselves, I don't know how many hours I've looked at album cover. You put the album on and you start listening to the songs and you're staring at the picture. You turn it over, you read all the liner notes, who played on it. And every time you put it on the turntable, you got it in your hand, you look at it again.
Yeah. How about the Jim Morrison Hotel album cover story?
A few months after CSN's album came out, we did that photo in '69, and it came out in later '69. I don't know, but the Doors saw it and called us up, and they said, we want you guys to do our album cover. They liked that one so much. And so Gary and I went down to their office, and it was only Jim and Ray Manzarek, the keyboard player, there. And so we started talking to him. We said, okay, have you got a title? No, we don't have a title. You know, well, what do you want on your cover? You have any idea what you'd like on there? No, we don't have any idea. We're going, okay, well, you know, and then Ray Manzarek spoke up kind of at random. He said, you know, my wife Dorothy and I were driving through downtown LA the other day, and we saw this funky old hotel that said Morrison Hotel. We all went, wow, I mean, that sounds great. You know, let's go down there right this minute and look at it. We did. The four of us piled in their Volkswagen van, their tour van, and we drove down to downtown LA, and there it was, Morrison Hotel. We took a few pictures outside, Jim and Ray standing out in front of that window. And then we said, well, okay, let's come back with the band now in a few days, and we'll do the photos here. So like a week later, all four of the guys and Gary and I went back, walked into the lobby. Now, it was a transient hotel. In the window, the sign says rooms $250 and up. It meant $2.50, you know. Today's $250, of course, and it meant you could rent a cot, you know, to sleep it off before you got to the car again. So we walked in the lobby, and it was a funky lobby. Nobody was in the lobby. There was a little desk with a guy behind the desk, and everyone walked into the lobby. I was the last one, and I said to the guy behind the desk, he was looking like, what's going on? I said, well, we're just going to take a few photos over there. No big deal. And he said, no, you can't. You can't take any photos in here. I said, why not? He said, oh, you've got to get the owner's permission. Well, where is he? Well, he's out of town. It turns out that he was a famous slumlord. Kind of a gruff, mean guy, and everybody was scared of him. So that guy was, for his life, he was saying, no. So I walked up to the doors and Gary and I said, hey, you guys, they're not going to let us do this here. So let's walk outside and we'll stand right in front of that window and they can't stop us. We're on a public sidewalk. And we did that. We walked outside and they were about to stand up against the window. And I looked through the window and I saw a light. There was a light in the back of the lobby, a big white light that had come on. And I looked, I said, that's the elevator light. And look, the guy left the desk and went up in the elevator. So run in there, you guys. And then they ran in there, got behind the window. I mean, we didn't have to say, okay, move to the left, move to the right, nothing. They just, we couldn't talk through the window anyway. And they just hit their marks. And I took one roll of film, 5 minutes, and we got out of there.
I want to get into the Morrison Hotel Gallery and the fact that you're partnering, I believe, with Peter Blakely, Richard Horowitz, Timothy White, and now Mick Fleetwood in Maui, Hawaii, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
So tell us about the gallery. It's in New York, it's in LA, it's in Maui, and something you have great photographers that you pick, quality photographers.
Well, in the 80s, I did a lot of work for Capitol Records, and I met a guy there in the video department. His name was Peter Blacksley. We became really good friends, and he knew that I had Super 8 movies of Woodstock and a couple of things, and he said, Henry, we should put these on TV. Why don't you bring them in? We'll make a video. And so we got to be good friends, and then I'm trying to think of the sequence of events. He and Gary Burden and I ended up making a DVD of album covers called Under the Covers. And so when we did that, we had a lady, Kathy Carapella, who did the sound, the licensing of the music for that DVD. And one day on the phone, she said, you guys have all these pictures. You should meet this friend of mine, Rich Horowitz, who goes around the country selling John Lennon lithographs for the Lennon Foundation, for Yoko and John. And she said, I think you guys could do some work together. And so Peter called him and we worked. He said, I've always thought I could sell photos around the country like I'm selling these Lennon lithographs. He'd been doing that for like 8 or 9 years. And so we said, well, let's give it a try. We'll go to a few major cities, rent a little place in a hotel or a shopping center, and over like a 4-day weekend, we'll advertise in the local papers and the TV and radio. Because Rich knew how to reach all those people because of his years of barnstorming with the Lennon lithographs. So we'd spend a year summer doing that. And gosh, a lot of people would come in and we'd sell photos. When we got to New York, and Peter had the idea that, well, let's, why don't we, there's all these places up for lease in Soho.
Right.
Problem was they wanted like $35,000 a month, to lease a little storefront with a big window. And so we talked to one of the real estate guys and said, what if we just paid, a few $1,000 for the weekend? We can't lease it, for a year. But can we do it on a week-to-week basis? And they said, yeah, sure. It looks better with photos on the wall than a black, empty place anyway. And that was the beginning of the Morrison Hotel. Now, in the beginning, we didn't have a name. It was just, there was a little note on the door that said the photos of Henry Diltz, but nothing on the window. So one day, I was standing with Peter across the street, and we were looking across the street at our little storefront. And in the window was a big blow up of the Morrison Hotel, of them behind that window with the beautiful lettering over it. Right? And we stood there, we'd watch people walk by right in the middle of Soho, lots of people. And they'd walk by, many of them would stop, they'd look, and they'd walk back and take a look, and then they'd walk in the gallery. It was like a magnet, And I said, boy, that's great, Peter, look at that. And I said, but look at how beautiful that lettering Morrison Hotel is down at the bottom of the window on that big blow up. And now look at the top. It's just a window. We got nothing, And that's how the conversation went, And he said, that's a good idea. I'm going to call a painter tomorrow and have him write Morrison Hotel on our window, you know, to go with that photo, to get more people to come in. So
Right.
that's what we did. And of course, it stuck as the name of the gallery.
I've been to your opening since your gallery started. They've been phenomenal. I met Neil Young there in New York. I met Graham Nash, Mick Rock, Bob Gruen, name it. You have a quality rock list.
Yeah.
And I must say that you're the only gallery that has that quality rock list in this that I've ever seen. And I want to thank you for that and bringing your gallery into my life. And I just want to tell you that Timothy White, Judith, and I did a book for him, Indian Larry. Great photographer. And you're partnering with him, and all your partners are great people. And besides yourself, I want to get into one last thing. You have a book of yourself called Unpainted Faces that came out on Morrison Hotel.
Yeah.
And also the new book. This is big time. I believe last weekend, Eagles Up Ahead in the Distance, Volume 2 by Rick Forgo and Steve Caffarelli, which I just spoke to before the show. Great people, great book, and a lot of your photographs in there. Tell us about the book. The Eagles are a big thing in your life.
I heard about the book once it was written, and contacted us and wanted to know if we could have a book signing in our gallery, which we did about a week ago. And it was great. And I didn't write the book, but they used, 20, 30 of my pictures in there. So it's a great book. I really like it. And so my other books, first of all, I want to say the reason we have this great gallery, I think, is because all of us photographers, back in the 70s, there were entrepreneurs. And I would get calls, they say, starting a new gallery, we're going to call it Rock Photo, and I always thought, the people, Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, rock, they're singers.
Yeah.
I didn't like that Rock Photo. Some guy started a little museum in Hollywood, a music museum, and then he left town with all the pictures. So that was happening all the time. You'd get ripped off, you never made any money really. And so when we started ours, it was just for my pictures. And for the first year, it was only my pictures in the gallery.
Right.
And people would walk in and say, oh my God, this is my whole life, because it was all the Laurel Canyon, Joni Mitchell, CSN, all those people. Since I'm a photographer, been ripped off, I think other photographers thought, we can trust these people. And what happened was the first year or two, only my pictures. One day, my partner, Peter Black, she said, Henry, we ought to have a second photographer in here. And that way we have an opening and a party and we can get PR. And I said, yeah, great. And he said, who of all your peers of rock, music photographers would you want to have in here as a second person? And I said, Jim Marshall, because Jim Marshall was my guru, my effing guru, as he called himself. And then he was a granddaddy kind of music photographer,
right?
And photography. And when other photographers saw that he and I were selling photos, they thought, wow, we'd like to be in there. We know we can trust you guys. So we kept adding. We added, Bob Gruen in New York. We added Neil Preston in L.A., David Fletch, Lynn Goldsmith, on and on and on. And today we have 125.
Wow.
Or I can't keep track of it. 125 at least music photographers. So
wow.
There's something for everybody in there. We have brand new people and older people, and it worked out. It was, like I say, it was kind of an accident. It was an accident.
You had two shows at the Morrison yourself. I went to the August show in New York, and you had a show in L.A. Tell us about your show that you had recently.
we used to have an opening. We'd have, when Jim came, we had a great big huge opening with him, and it was some kind of photo week in New York. I mean, we had 15 music photographers down there having our picture taken all in a group, so in order to, make an announcement and get people in, we'd have an opening every month of some kind. And, and Henry Diltz is going to show his, something Woodstock photos, and then Jim Marshall's going to show his, Grateful Dead photos. And as we added more and more photographers, we couldn't have a whole night of one photographer. Then we would say, okay, it's going to be a Blondie night, and it's going to be 10 different photographers of photograph 20, or David Bowie, 20 different photographers. So we didn't do just one photographer with his life's work. We did a subject like Laurel Canyon, or the New York punk scene, or whatever it was. And so we've done that all along, and only just recently we decided that, well, let's go back to what we used to do for once, and do a show of mine. I'm happy that idea came up.
It's great.
Because it's been almost 20 years since I've seen the gallery hung with only my pictures. When I go in the gallery here in LA nowadays, I look around and I see 2, maybe 3 of my pictures of the 100 pictures on the wall. Right. So that was nice, to have.
It was. The show I remember, one of the shows that you did, which was the Julian Lennon show. That was a big show, and CBS had Julian on. It was a big weekend, I remember, and so many people showed up, and we met Julian, and it was a great photography show you put on with Julian.
That really was. Yeah, we've had some really good shows, and done really well. We have quite a list of clientele. It turns out people want to see their musical hero on their wall.
Right. That's right.
In fact, he lives in Laurel Canyon, but he's from San Francisco, and he bought a great big blow up of Jerry Garcia of mine, hanging above my mantle in the living room. And every day when I put the key in the lock, open the door after work, I walk in, and a big smile hits my face because there's Jerry right above my mantle. So
well, I got to tell you a story. We just interviewed Mark Weiss, who's a very big rock photographer, has a big book out, beautiful book. And I asked him, what photographers did you look up to? And immediately he said, Henry Diltz. I just want to tell you that you have a mark with me and an album design, so many great photographers. You're a landmark in the music history. And I'm so glad you're on. And thank you so much for coming on. And we're going to get this interview out to a lot of people. I just want to tell you.
Yeah, but so I just I was really nervous about this interview, I have to say, because I'm so in such awe of you, Henry, and what you've done, and what a life you've had. It's like really incredible. I guess it's part of it is being at the right place at the right time. I'm guessing.
Exactly.
Because you were at the right places at the right time. One of the things I was thinking about, when, I did some research on you, and so all these amazing musicians that you had come into contact with, that you were friends with, I was thinking, were you ever present when one of these musicians came up with some iconic song? Right in front of you? Were you ever there? And when you were just, off, time, just talking?
I'll tell you one thing. I met Linda McCartney when she was Linda Eastman at the Modern Age Photo Gallery in New York City. We were both getting our film developed, and we just started talking and became friends. And we had lunch a few times if she came to LA or I went to New York. And then I saw wow, she married Paul McCartney. And soon after that, I got a phone call, and it was Linda, and she said, Henry, we need a picture of the two of us together.
Oh, wow. Yeah, great photograph.
She was his photographer, once she married him, but they needed them both in the same picture because they were singing together now in Wings. And so I went out to they had rented a house on the beach in Malibu, and I went out there, and we sat around the pool all afternoon, and because because I'm a real easygoing photographer. I don't like to set things up. I just like to be there quietly and watch. And when the pictures happen, I just push the button. I mean, I want to observe real happenings, real human nature. So I'm kind of a quiet photographer in that way. And so we sat around the pool and ate lunch and talked about music. I'd been a musician. And then he was sitting on the deck chair playing a ukulele, just plunk, 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 plunk.
Oh.
And he's looking around, and his two daughters hold hands and jump the swimming pool together. And without missing a beat, he started singing, "Two little sisters jumping in the pool." But it was a beautiful tune. I don't remember that, but I remember the words were, and he's already plunking. And he just adds the words as it happens. I guess like I take photos, I see it, I push the button. He sees it, he sings about it. And I knew and I thought to myself, no one else is going to ever hear that song. I mean, if it came out on an album, they would. It didn't. So I heard an original Paul McCartney song that no one in the world ever heard. And soon after that song came out where it's, "Who's that knocking at the door?"
Oh my God!
Wow.
And I knew he was sitting on the couch with his feet up on the coffee table, and there was a knock at the door, and he just, without missing a beat, he started singing, "Who's that knocking at the door?" I mean, I saw how he does it.
Wow, that's great.
And he laid there with, lovely Rita. I mean, they're like sound pictures.
So not only were you present taking their photos, but you were present and you saw, their process, how they did, or at least some of them anyway, how they wrote the songs that they wrote. Truly incredible.
The thing is, the reason I could do that is because, I'm not this great photographer. I don't arrive with my cameras and a retinue. I'm just a quiet guy. I was a psychology major, which means I'm interested in human nature. I'm interested in people. Wow, who are we? What are how do we work? What are we to do? I really like to observe. And so that, plus being a musician, and musicians learn to hang out. I mean, half our lives we hang out, in a recording studio, backstage, in a motel room, on an airplane, in an airplane. Musicians play for a few hours, but they hang out all the time. I know how to hang out. I mean, I don't walk in there and start taking pictures. I walk in there and hang out for a while, until
because of you being a musician. I think that you must have had an understanding of, of the musician. You were the photographer, and I'm not sure what all of these musicians were thinking about you, because if you walk into a room, in your early days, they knew you as a musician. Am I correct with that?
Exactly.
They didn't know you as a photographer, and so they were trusting, putting full faith, full trust into your abilities as a photographer, which is also quite something incredible.
There weren't many photographers around in those days, like there are. Well, everybody has a cell phone now. Everyone's a photographer, but in the early days, I mean, there was maybe one or two guys doing it, And the other thing is, they knew me as a musician. They didn't even notice the camera at first. But musicians belong to a club. I mean, if you're a musician and you meet a new guy, another musician that you never met before, you're automatically, kind of buddies, because you both do the same thing. It's an unspoken club,
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you were very close with the Eagles. Very close with the Eagles.
Yeah, because in LA, we all hung out at the Troubadour Club. I mean, every night you go down there because all your friends were there. Either in playing on stage or in the audience or in the bar. A lot of stuff happened in that bar. People hanging out all evening talking. And Linda Ronstadt played the Troubadour quite often. And she assembled a bunch of guys to play with her who turned out to be the Eagles. They came from different bands.
Right.
She very hip to musicians, and she liked all the boys in the band and wanted to be one of the boys in the band herself, so she was a sweet lady, and she would get these boys to play with her, and they became a band. I mean, Henley on the drums, and Glenn Frey and Bernie Ledden, and Randy Meisner, who had been in Poco, and they'd all come from other groups. And so, I mean, Glenn Frey told me one day, he said, yeah, we came to town to be Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and so, and he told me the story about one day, one of David's girlfriends brought a little bud of grass to those guys, like God's herb, right? Which all musicians had a little taste of almost every day because it made you want to make music, And they brought a little bud of Crosby's grass, and Glenn Frey said he and J.D. Souther ran out the back door of the Troubadour, rolled it up, and smoked it. And they said, wow, no wonder those guys write those great songs.
That's a great story.
Yeah. And so the Eagles, when they started out, I mean, I knew them from the Troubadour. I was the obvious guy to go on the road and take pictures, and they were there with Geffen Roberts, and Gary and I did everything for Geffen Roberts. So we got to know them, and on the road. I mean, I went on the road so many times with them all over the country. First in a little 2-engine plane, and then later in a great big passenger jet, with bars and couches, bedrooms, and great guys. Lots of fun to tour with. Because they're very clever. I mean, Henley always had his nose in a book, and they just were, to hear them talk to each other was really, it was exciting. They were excited.
Wow.
They had great minds. I mean, they would come up with those songs. And I mean, I not only like to watch people, I also like to listen. When I wasn't taking pictures, I was writing down stuff. Somebody would say something, and it would sound so great. And I would think, wow, that's a great statement. That it's perfect the way they said that. It's like a little poem, like a little found poem. And I always knew I would forget it 5 minutes later. So I would write it down so I wouldn't forget it. And I was always writing down stuff those guys were saying because they were funny. They were clever. They had a good time.
Oh, it's great stories. Oh, my God.
And, of course.
We could go on forever and ever with you, Henry, because your stories are mind-blowing in music. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And we hope to have you on again sometime because you're just a life legend.
And we didn't even talk about the Monkees and David Cassidy, for Pete's sake.
How about Monkees, David Cassidy? America.
Garth Brooks. I just came back from Dublin for 10 days. With
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's more we can talk
David Cassidy, you had a very big thing with, I know. David
around
Cassidy.
the world with him, yeah. I mean, I used to work for Teeny Bopper magazines. They would hire me to go shoot the Monkees while they filmed their shows.
Wow.
And they would make those pictures the little girls would put up on their walls, those color portraits.
That was me. I did that. Hello. I did that I wish I had some of those magazines today.
And at Tiger Beat, the Monkees, I shot the second season. The first season they were on, Mickey Dolenz told me, there'd be these professional photographers, like AP guys with a big camera. They'd say, okay, boys, do something zany, so I could take it. I just hated that, Mickey said, we just walk away, But when I got down there with my long hair and love beats and all, I was about their age and kind of a hippie guy. And we became friends the first day. I became best friends with all of them.
Wow.
So I'd be down there almost every day shooting them. And then on the summer tour in 68 all over the country. And then 2 years later, or 4 years later, the phone rang again. And it's the same guy at Tiger Beat magazine, the photo editor. Henry, we'd like you to go down to the Partridge Family soundstage where they're filming the show. Take a bunch of pictures like you used to do, and we'll pay you for the day. I went down there. I didn't know anybody. But once again, I had long hair, and right up to me. Hey, man, what do you do? I said, I just got back from England. I was living with Stephen Stills over there. He went, really? He said, you know, the next break filming, come to my trailer. I've got a guitar. I'll play you some songs. Because he was so frustrated being David, oh, what was his name? Partridge. Keith. He was so frustrated being Keith Partridge.
Right.
He wanted to be on stage singing like that. And so, you know, he saw me as a kindred spirit, which I was. And then he started doing solo gigs and traveling all over. And soon I was in Australia 2 or 3 times, New Zealand, Japan, Europe 3 times. Just, you know, I just became his pal and photographed everything that happened and saw the world. That was great. That was early 70s.
Now,
Really?
now you were very close also with Joni Mitchell, and she was different because she was a singer and songwriter, right?
Right.
And so that was a big thing.
It is a big thing. And, you know, in the older, well, in the 50s, right, and the 60s, I said, well, you don't write a folk song. Those are old songs. But you think Frank Sinatra never wrote a song, great a singer as he is, right? Elvis Presley never wrote a song. I think his mom wrote some song. But anyway, you had the singers and you had the songwriters. The songwriters wrote the songs and the singers would sing them. After the Beatles, once again, they were on Ed Sullivan singing She Loves You, Yeah, 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 which was an original song. We were all singing folk songs. And we not only said, wow, they have an electric bass, but wow, they're singing an original song. And that was the start of the singer-songwriter. Because after them, you had people like Joni Mitchell and James Taylor and Paul Simon, and Neil Young and Stephen Stills started writing their own song. Then you got, I mean, it wasn't just June, Spoon, you know, Moon. It was somebody singing about life as they saw it and thought about it and felt it in their heart, like Joni Mitchell, an amazing lady. I mean, I always say these people I photographed in my life were all heroes of mine, and they all were very well known and well loved because they really are all amazing people, you know. They're just real interesting people. They got interesting things going on in their head and they look at life in an interesting way. I mean, I know that because I'm a psychology major.
But you never photograph Joan Baez or Bob Dylan?
Bob Dylan a few times. I never hung out with them like I did, you know, the Doors and CSN and the Eagles because they weren't in LA, I guess. I mean, I was pals with everyone who lived here and was hung out at the Troubadour. But I photographed Bob at a Nukes concert and then at, Woodstock 94 at Bangladesh. I was shooting that, you know. I mean, I took photos at so many festivals, beginning with the Monterey Pop and then Woodstock and all. I love going to festivals and you can see 30, 40 of the best acts in the land, you know, in 3 days. And that's really fun. So I photographed Joan Baez the same here and there.
Was there anybody that you have wished you had photographed that you did not, or you weren't able to, or somebody that you'd like to for the future photograph?
The first answer is John Lennon. Because I never photographed the Beatles, you know, but I photographed Paul McCartney a lot, and I photographed Ringo Starr a lot over the years, later years. I photographed George Harrison a little bit, especially at the Bangladesh concert. But I never photographed John Lennon, you know. But Bob Dylan in New York did a heck of a job documenting his life and taking beautiful pictures. Beyond that, before I ever got into folk music in high school, I loved West Coast jazz, Chet Baker, Jerry Mulligan, Dave Brubeck, saxophone player, Paul Desmond. That's why I picked up a clarinet in high school. I wanted to play that kind of standards, you know, that beautiful jazz standards, and then you take a solo. And I wished I'd have been around to photograph them, but I'm happy.
Oh yes. Oh yes. You have luck.
I mean, I want to tell everybody before we leave here that you did photograph the Rolling Stones. Some great shots of Keith Richards and whatever.
Oh. Well, I photographed a few concerts of them, and I photographed them up one time at a rented house. They were staying in Laurel Canyon, a group shot. But then a friend of mine worked at Columbia Records, and he said, Henry, do you want to go on the road for a few weeks with this new group? It's Ron Wood's solo group. He did a solo album.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Of the Rolling Stones. And then he did an album, and then the label said, well, now, Ronnie, you've got to publicize this. You've got to spend the summer touring around the country to sell your album. So get a group together. So he asked Keith Richards, who joined the group. They had great major musicians in the group. And I was on the road with them for 2 weeks. You know, every hotel, they had a big airplane, of course, you know, every limousine, and taking pictures of those guys. And it was like the Rolling Stones without Mick being there.
Right,
so
right.
Pulse wasn't there. So everything was allowed, you know.
Wow.
I mean, they had more fun because there wasn't anybody, telling them to cool it, you know. That was fun. I got some great shots of Keith Richards, way more than Mick, but yeah.
Well, you're still photographing to this day. I would venture to assume that you're doing that. I'm just curious what kind of a camera you're using these days.
Yeah, the camera thing went from this little Japanese camera I don't even know the name of to a Pentax. And when I was working on the Monkees show, you have to have two cameras, one for black and white and one for color. But it kept breaking, so I'd had to get a third camera because one camera would always be in the shop getting fixed. Because I'd bang them on the light stands. I'd use them a lot all day long. And then somebody stole my camera bag out of the back seat of my boat.
Oh, no.
The Hollywood Cleaners. I went in for 5 minutes and came out.
Oh, God.
And a friend, that was a great thing. As often in life, when something seems really negative, just hang on a minute because it might lead to something better. In this case, it did. I needed a camera, so a friend had an extra Nikon.
Oh, wow.
I said, wow, this camera is like, I can take this and it doesn't break. So I started buying Nikon cameras. So for 35 years, I used Nikons and slide film and black and white film. And then in 2005, I was saying to somebody, I will never be a digital guy. You know, I'm a film guy. I picked up a friend's Canon with the telephoto lens and I looked through it. I said, wow, this is focusing itself. Its own light reading. I had a little light meter. I take a reading and then I have to set it. And then, sometimes the picture would be over by then, right? So just pick it up, click. And I thought, this is magic. I got so
Magic.
switched from Nikon to Canon. Now I shoot Canon cameras.
Wow. Great.
I don't do a lot of music photos. I do once in a while. But I shoot 100 pictures a day with my little pocket point and shoot Canon camera. I just shoot,
I'll tell you something. I got to tell you about one photograph that knocks me out. It's the Kurt Cobain color photograph that Peter Blatchley, I was talking to Peter on the phone, and he says, ask Henry about the Kurt Cobain shot.
Yeah. All right. This is the story. My 16-year-old daughter, Zoe, wanted to see Nirvana. And I said, well, honey, I don't know those guys. I don't know those people at all. But wait, I think I know the management company. So I'll call them up. And they said, sure, we'll, give you a couple tickets. And they threw in a photo pass. So now we're going to the Coliseum or one of those big concert places. And my wife said, because I'm taking my 16-year-old daughter to her first concert, she said, don't you let her out of your sight for a moment. Right? Okay, yes, ma'am. So we're sitting way in the back of the hall, looking out over the audience, and way down there's the stage. And the first song starts, and I see all my friends, all my fellow photographers, all jammed up shooting photos. And I thought, God, I'm an idiot. I should be down there. I'd never seen it before, So I turned to Zoe and said, Zoe, honey, don't move, and she sat there. Well, and I walked down. I had my photo pass. You could only shoot 3 songs. It took the second song just to get there. So I'm standing there ready, looking up at the 3rd song, and Kurt Cobain is just standing at the mic, just standing there singing, and a yellow light on him, no guitar. I mean, and then halfway through the song, or near the end of the song, somehow he picked up a guitar and turned around and threw his head back. And I got this one shot that should have been blurry. It should have been dark.
Right.
I always say it was a gift from God, because it turned out perfectly. And it's a real exciting, like, one shot of that whole thing,
That's one of my favorite photographs of yours that is embedded in my mind.
Oh, that's great. And yeah. It's a bright, colorful rock and roll moment. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. Out of the box, I call it. Out of the box, Henry.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, man. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure. Great talking to you guys.
Oh, thanks. You brought history into our life.
Thank you for giving us your time.
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe when I have some kind of a new book coming out, we could do it again.
Oh, yeah. Love it. Oh, you kidding?